in just a couple of minutes. Welcome, everyone.
Hey.
I've done that really annoying thing where it switches off mic for everyone, so bear with me 2 seconds now. I'll sort that.
I think you can do it for all, though. You can allow mics for all attendees and all cameras. I'll do it now.
Can you remember where it is?
I've just done it for everyone.
You've just done it? Perfect.
So when you go participants, you press the 3 dots and then it's just there at the top.
Cool. Perfect. Cool. Welcome, everyone. We've got Ken in the lobby. Welcome, Keith. Good to see you, Matt.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Really looking forward to this. Top-notch speakers as always.
Just going to bring up my welcome slides. We'll just be a wee minute. That's annoying. There was a problem displaying the content. Thanks, Teams.
Yeah, we can see your screen there.
Yeah. Leave this up for a couple of minutes. Rani, are you okay keeping an eye on the lobby and just letting people in?
Of course.
Right. We're just gone 6 o'clock, so let's get started. First and foremost, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. And welcome to our speakers, Nathan Rose, Microsoft Biz Apps MVP, Devendra and Charles Sexton. So we've got 3 really great speakers for you this evening. Just before we hand over to speakers, there's a few things I wanted to do. Firstly, I want to welcome Josh and Rani. We're now a team of 4. So we have Charlie Phipps Bennett rather, which we'll talk about in a moment. Our founder, myself, Stuart Baxter, co-founder. We've got Rani and we've got Josh who've just come on board as well, who'll be taking on helping with event planning and event coordination. So speakers and things, will be speaking with Josh to get organised and get onboarded, and Rani's going to be helping with a lot of the business admin and making sure that me and Charlie don't forget things, quite honestly. And secondly, congratulations to our founder, Charlie Phipps, who's now Charlie Phipps Bennett, a married man. On behalf of the whole team, I just want to wish Charlie and Rosie all the happiness in the world, and congratulations, Matt.
Thank you very much.
And that's about it in terms of welcome stuff from me. Before I hand over to our first speaker, I just remind everyone we do like to be respectful of our speakers and respectful of everyone's time. We welcome all opinions, but please be nice. So far, we haven't had any instances of anyone being anything but nice, but we always like to remind people. So I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, Nathan. Over to you, Matt.
Oh, thanks so much, Stuart. Good evening, everyone. Kia ora from New Zealand. It is I'm actually in the future, so it is the 1st of May here. So if you need stock tips, sports scores, I'm your man. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And okay, is the presentation coming through all right?
It is indeed. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming along. I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to present to you all today about one of my great passions, low-code Power Effects plugins. So we'll be doing a deep dive into the world of low-code plugins today. So as Stuart said, I'm Nathan Rose. I am a lead consultant at Capgemini here in beautiful Auckland. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in business applications. I've kind of become the Power Effects guy over the last couple of years. So A couple of years ago, when I first took Mark Smith's 90-day mentoring challenge, you mentioned there wasn't a lot of content around PowerFX, so I just kind of picked it up and ran with it, and I've kind of become the PowerFX guy. And I am super passionate about empowering you with the Power Platform, particularly with low-code tools like PowerFX. So a quick overview of our time together today. So what we'll do is we'll dive into what PowerFX is, where you can use it. I'll give you an overview of low-code plugins, including the Dataverse Accelerator app, and then we'll get hands-on with them, and I'll show you all the stuff that you can do with them. There's still a preview feature, so the beautiful thing is that we get to work out what's possible before we have to walk it back to what's responsible at a GA. We'll get into when you should be using low-code plugins versus their traditional peers, some random tips and tricks, and then Q&A. Before we get started, I love for my sessions to be as interactive as possible. So if at any point in time you have a question, a comment, something you don't understand, even something you don't agree with, feel free to come off mute and let's chat about it. While I'm presenting, I don't have ready access to the chat. So if you prefer to put your comment or question there, Stuart or Josh, if you wouldn't mind just monitoring the chat and letting me know if there's something in there I need to respond to, we can get into it.
All
awesome.
good,
All right. Cool. Well, let's dive in. All right. What is PowerFX? So PowerFX is Microsoft's low-code language that's used to customize the Power Platform, and it is proliferating across the Power Platform at a rapid pace. It's comprised of human-friendly commands that can be used by either citizen or pro devs. It's strong typed, functional, and declarative. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. I didn't myself until a few weeks ago, and we'll dive into that in a second. And it's meant to work just like Excel. So if you are, as my boss has a mug that says "Freak in the Sheets" with an Excel logo on it. Before we get in trouble, if you're a bit of an Excel whiz, then you should be able to just go right over to PowerFX, and you pretty much understand it and you know how it works. All right, where can you use it? Well, it is proliferating across the Power Platform. It started life in Canvas apps. So if you've worked with Canvas apps, then you've worked with PowerFX. You're quite familiar with it. It then moved to the model-driven app in custom pages and modern commanding. It then moved over to Dataverse, and we got Dataverse calculated columns a couple of years ago, which is a GA feature. Then low-code plugins, which we're going to go into today, was announced about a year ago at the Build conference. We've got the command line interface. We'll get into that a little bit as well. And then some new preview features in Power Automate Desktop and Copilot Studio. So it is just exploding across the Power Platform, and it's pretty exciting to see all the stuff that you can do with it. All right, but getting back to strong typed, what does that mean and why does it matter? So if you've worked with PowerFX in a Canvas app, you might have noticed when you're trying to do things that you get that red squiggly line in the IntelliSense under what you're trying to do, and it'll say you can't do that. So a common example would be trying to add a number and a string column together. In PowerFX, they put those guardrails and training wheels in place to ensure that any potential issues are addressed at the head end when you're building the app and not at runtime. So in a more traditional programming language that like C# or something like that, that's going to be a bit more weaker typed, as long as your syntax is correct, it's going to let you compile and run that code. And then depending on the language that you're in, it's either going to assume that you wanted to concatenate that number and string, or it's going to throw you a nasty error. So PowerFX tries to ward that off at the head end and say you've got to give me things that I know what to do with. So convert that string to a number, convert that number to a string, so on and so forth. So that's strong typed. What about declarative? There is a great video from April Dunham on this, talking about the differences between the two. Traditional languages are imperative, which means that you don't only tell it what you want, you give it all the steps on how to get there. April Dunham talks about the idea of a chef. I'm more of a McDonald's guy, so in an imperative language, you would go through the jingle, right? 2 beef patties, special sauce and cheese, all on a sesame seed bun. So now that we're all craving a Big Mac, and unfortunately I got to wait 5 hours till it opens here, But that's an imperative language. Whereas in PowerFX, you just roll up to the drive-through and say, "Give me the Big Mac," and then you're off and running with the Big Mac. And so that's what PowerFX does. So it makes it really easy for people who are not professional developers to pick it up and start creating and doing stuff with it. Okay, but you might be asking, why do we have these low-code plugins? We've had Power Automate for a number of years now. It's great. It does everything I could possibly want it to do. And I'd agree with you, because until low-code plugins were announced last year, I was of the opinion that we were probably going to see plugins just slowly disappear, because you can pretty much do anything you need to do with Power Automate. The key phrase here would be synchronous. So when you need a process to be real time, meaning that record is locked and nothing can happen until from when the process is triggered to when it finishes running, that's when you need a plugin or a synchronous process. So this is really common in financial services, legal type of settings, where we need to absolutely control what happens to that record. So that's when you would use a plugin. Plugins also let you control when the logic fires. So before or after a save to Dataverse, they run, and you have a hard 2-minute timeout in Dataverse for that runtime for the plugin. And anytime you have requirements that would exceed what Power Automate can do, that's when you would use a plugin. Whereas Power Automate is great for async processes. So that's probably going to be 80+% of the time. Most of the time you're going to be in the async world, and Power Automate is going to be just fine. It is fantastic at any heavy duty looping or processing anything that's going to exceed that 2-minute timeout in Dataverse. Whenever you don't have a pro dev available or a process that exceeds what you can do in a PowerFX plugin, then Power Automate is going to be your friend. And this is going to be a bit of a controversial one, but this is my opinion. I believe that you have better process traceability in Power Automate than you would in a plugin. Now, if there's any pro devs on the call, they might say that we've got the plugin trace logs. The reality is, my experience is that in Power Automate, you get that great level of detail in terms of each step, what went into it, what it tried to do, what came out of it. And so that's just my personal opinion. But again, open to different perspectives on that. Okay, if you are a pro dev, you'll be very familiar with this. If you are a functional or a citizen developer, you may not be as familiar with the plugin execution pipeline. But before we get into low-code plugins, this is something we need to cover off. So plugins in Dataverse follow this 4-stage execution pipeline. Pre-validation means that the plugin runs when you need to validate whether or not it needs to run at all. Pre-operation means it runs before you save to Dataverse. Now, if you are from the world of Power Automate, this will be a new concept to you, because Power Automate runs here after you've saved to Dataverse. The beauty of saving before of running before the save to Dataverse means that it makes it much easier to roll back if we need to. If the plugin encounters an error or some other issue, we can easily roll it back. There's the main operation, which is the actual save to Dataverse. Microsoft don't allow you to execute plugin logic there, and then post-operation is after you save to Dataverse. Now, your traditional plugins will run pre-validation or operation or post-operation. The PowerFX plugins run pre or post-operation. I checked in with a pro dev friend of mine who said that they don't really use pre-validation very often. Most traditional plugins will run pre or post-operation as well. And given that in PowerFX, you can put in some very powerful if and switch condition statements in your plugin logic, I'd argue that you don't really need to execute it at pre-validation. Okay. The plugins are authored in something called the Dataverse Accelerator app. So this is an app Microsoft released last year when plugins were announced. It's effectively just a custom page if you really get into the details of it. If you create it, it comes by default in any newly created environment. So if you spin up a new environment, you'll see this there by default. If you have an older environment, you'll need to go and download it off of AppSource. But basically, you author your plugin here using PowerFX in the authoring canvas. The C# code gets compiled behind the scenes, and then your plugin is available to be consumed in Power Apps or Power Automate, or in the case of the automated plugins, it'll just run in Dataverse when it's triggered. All right, and there's two types of low-code plugins, instant and automated. And the best frame of mind here, frame of reference here would be Power Automate. Works exactly the same way. Instant is triggered by a user, automated is triggered by a Dataverse event. There's a few differences between them. The instant plugins can be global or table bound. So if you've worked in Power Automate and you think in terms of bound and unbound action connectors in Dataverse, that's the exact same concept for the low-code plugin. So you can either have it work anywhere in Dataverse or bound to a specific table. You can declare input and output parameters for them, connect them to APIs and connectors, and they can call or be called by Cloudflows, and we'll get into that in a bit. The automated plugins are triggered, again, they're triggered by an event in Dataverse. These are the ones where you get into that plugin execution pipeline of running pre or post operation. They're bound to a table. You can't declare any input or output parameters, so your input parameters are pretty much limited to that table that it's been triggered off of. You can connect them to APIs and connectors for pretty much limitless extensibility. And you can't directly call Cloudflows from these. You could get around it by using by triggering a Dataverse event that calls the Cloudflow, but you do want to be careful with that. I think I saw somebody had a hand up. Is there a question?
Yeah, that was me. I was going to ask about that calling the Cloudflows. If you can call the API, you can basically work around and call the Cloudflow just using the web request, right? And then my question was actually first initially, can you have the instant low-code plugin that would call, or sorry, automated plugin that would call an instant plugin that would then call the Cloudflow, or it's too much overwork?
Yeah, my experience, great question. So in terms of the instant plugins, you can call them or call them from a Cloudflow or have them call a Cloudflow, and we'll get into that in a bit. The automated ones, I haven't seen a way to call a Cloudflow from them. So that's not to say that there isn't. I haven't figured it out yet. So the way I'm kind of thinking about it is that you would have the plugin trigger an event in Dataverse that would then trigger the Cloudflow to run, or vice versa. The Cloudflow would trigger a Dataverse event that would trigger the plugin. What I've found is that I've actually seen some weird errors when I've had those situations. So I've seen weird errors in my Cloudflow, and when I get into it, it turns out that there was an automated plugin on the table I'd totally forgotten about that was having a problem. So I'd be really cautious about that approach, just because they don't always interact so nicely if you've gotten something wrong. So does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah, thanks.
Cool. Okay, let's get into the guts of the plugin. So the solution elements and ALM side of things. So the instant plugins are actually a custom API in Dataverse. That's actually what you're creating. So it's called a plugin. Parvez and I have had a few chats about this. You can, you could make an argument that it isn't really a plugin, but that's what Microsoft are calling it. So you're actually creating a custom API. So at the top of it is that there's a Dataverse table called FX expression that's going to hold your PowerFX expression, your YAML, JSON, and then underneath of it, there's a custom API with its request and response parameters. So these are all the solution elements. You're going to need to move these around between environments. What I found last year, Parvez and I were troubleshooting this quite a bit, was I moved the FX expressions and I could see the plugins in my target environment, but nothing would happen when you executed them. And you need all this stuff in your solution to move this around and have it work. So that's That's the setup for the instant plugin. Cool party trick, if you just add the custom API for your plugin to the solution, the FX expression and the request and response parameters automatically get added into the solution. So that saves you a bit of clicking around. And then the automated plugins, these are the ones that are actually traditional plugins in the, if we're being really really technical about the sense of the word. So there is a plugin assembly called PowerFX Plex and a plugin called the PowerFX Evaluator. So if you go to the XRM toolbox in the plugin registration tool, when you open this up, you'll see under the PowerFX Evaluator, all these plugin steps are automated plugins that you've created in the Dataverse Accelerator app. So that's what's actually happening behind the scenes with these things. So we've still got the FX expression table for your automated plugin that's going to have your YAML and JSON and whatnot. And then there's just a plugin step that is this thing here, and that you'll need to move the plugin around between environments. Okay, I think we've gone through enough of the background and the theory that we are ready to get hands-on with these things in the Power Platform. Now, before we do, I do have to do the responsible thing and issue a disclaimer. This is still a preview feature from Microsoft, so at any time and without prior warning, and I'm going to show you in a second why this rings true, this feature could substantially change or be discontinued. So you absolutely should not be using these in anything that isn't a dev or trial environment. So don't do it in prod, UAT, that type of thing. And I wouldn't be incorporating low-code plugins into any current solution design that you're putting together, just because we don't have a GA date. I suspect it's going to be soon. That's a personal opinion, nothing official. But I would still just, I would just work under the assumption that they are a preview and will be for the foreseeable future. But by all means, use them in any personal dev and trial environments. Get hands-on with them, see what they can do. Try it out with current requirements. Get a feel for what's possible. But again, do that in a dev environment. And this is why you should be very careful with preview features. So when I was prepping for this session yesterday, I was seeing lots of red squiggly lines in one of my plugins. And it turns out that the set expression is no longer supported in low-code plugins. So you've got to use patch instead. So when these first came out, we used patch to update rows in Dataverse. Then last year, Microsoft allowed us to use set, which is a little bit more performant. And then sometime in the last week, they've decided that you can't do that anymore, and that's changed. So this is why we don't do these things in prod when they're preview features, because again, you'd have to go and rewrite the plugin. You could run into a lot of issues. So good tangible object lesson there from Microsoft. Okay, let's get hands-on with the demo. So we'll get into the Dataverse Accelerator app. We'll get hands-on with instant plugins, automated plugins. We'll see them interacting with Power Automate, and we'll even get into the command line interface, and I'll show you a bit of fun stuff there with that. With that said, let me pop out of the presentation, and let's get into the Maker portal. Okay, so this is the Dataverse Accelerator app. You'll see it in your list of apps in the Power Platform Maker portal. It's just called Dataverse Accelerator app. And when you just click to play it, this is what it looks like. And it's fairly simple. It really just lets you create either instant or automated plugins. And so these are the instant plugins that I've created, and the automated ones. So we'll quickly get into an instant one, and let's take a look. I think this is the one I was going to show off. So it'll take a little bit of time to load. It's still preview. There we go. Okay, so with our instant plugins, we can declare our input parameters, And so you can put in strings, integers, decimals, booleans, entity reference, which is really handy. And then your output parameters can be the same type. The only thing you can't have is an entity reference as an output parameter. And then your power effects expression. This is where you write your formula. And this is a pretty simple one. This is just using an external connector to get a random trivia question. And so I'm using my connector. So all your connectors that are in the Power Platform are available to you, and they're pretty easy to work with. You just come here, pick the one you want, copy it, and then in your plugin, paste it in, and you can start working with it. One thing I will say is when you're working with these connectors, the IntelliSense in low-code plugins it isn't always super specific about what the API is looking for. So one of my favorite troubleshooting techniques for this is to go to Canvas apps, work with it in Canvas apps, and then come over to low-code plugins because you'll get a better feel for what that API is looking for. And then I'll just go to this one here. This is, actually, let's go here. No, we use this one. This is the first one I ever created, just straight out of the Microsoft Docs. This is more of a traditional Power Effects expression, just doing some simple arithmetic. So it's taking some integers in as input parameters, adding them together, and then spitting out a result. And one of the other things that you can do, we'll just go back to our random trivia, is that you can test these plugins, test the instant plugins in the Dataverse Accelerator app. So if we come here to test, it'll actually let us run this thing and get a result. And so we got a random trivia fact from that connector. It lets you do it with Dataverse as well. When this first came out, it would actually drop a row in Dataverse. It turns out that's a bug and they fixed that, so it doesn't do that anymore. You can test these out and get a feel for them. Then so let's go and see the instant plugin in action. Now these have to be called by a user, so they're pretty much designed to work in the context of a Canvas app or a custom page. You can call them from Power Automate. We'll get into that in a second, but we'll just come over here to my Canvas app. And so this is going to call this plugin, and it's going to display it here. So we'll just hold down the Alt key, and we got a random trivia fact via plugin. Now you might be saying, that's great, Nathan, but in Canvas apps I can just create a connection and have that happen in the Canvas app. Why do I need the plugin? And the key phrase here would be synchronous. So if we need synchronous processing, so this is going to happen real time. The record is locked; it can't be edited. No changes can happen from when this process is triggered to when it's completed. That's the context for this. So random trivia probably isn't the best example, but hopefully it just gives you an idea of what's possible with these things. So that's the instant plugins. We'll move on to their automated peers. So these are the automated plugins, and these are the ones that are triggered on a Dataverse event. So again, think Power Automate when you have a Cloudflow that's triggered when something happens. This is the exact same principle. So we'll go into this plugin here. So this is the one that we'll show this off in a second. This is the one that I had to rewrite the other day when the set expression stopped working. But basically, with your automated plugins, you're going to declare a table. You'll pick when it runs, so create, update, or delete. You can then select whether it runs pre or post operation. You can drop it into a solution as well at create, which is really cool. And then your Power Effects authoring canvas here. So I've got a series of patch commands that are doing some different things. So the first thing it's doing, and this is, I would say out of the box, this is probably the use case for automated plugins, is setting the name column on rows when they're created. So this is something we use classic workflow for today. You can use this to set the name column and do some stuff that we can't really do in classic workflow. So we just go over here to my model-driven app. Teams bar is always right where I need it to be, or I don't need it to be. Here we go. So giving it a name and a number type of thing. I can do that very easily in PowerFX, just counting the rows in the table and then adding one to it if I'm running pre, or in this case I'm running post operation, so I don't need to do that. That is, when you are working with these formulas, if you're not, if you haven't worked in the plugin world in terms of pre and post operation, and you're doing things like numbering, you do need to be cognizant of whether your plugin runs pre or post operation. If we're running pre-operation, we'd need to add a sum expression to this count rows to add one, because we haven't actually created the row yet when we're running this plugin. Whereas post operation, we've already created the row when we're counting it. So that's if you come from more of a functional background, that's some stuff you might need to get your head around as you're working with these. But then I'm just calling a bunch of connectors that I'm going to set on a record, and I'll show you this in a second. I did try this in terms of a single patch expression yesterday, and I got a bunch of nasty errors. So I've run it as 5 separate ones on this plugin. But that's basically an automated plugin. So it's a little bit simpler than the instant one. Now you can't. One of the things that you can't do in these is you can't declare variables, which can be a little limiting. Like when you're in a Canvas app, you can declare variables and whatnot. The way around that is to use the with expression. So I think I've got that here. No. That might be one of my instant ones. Yeah, so this was one that Keith and I were working on a few weeks ago, and we wanted to test the execution time for the main plugin operation here, creating a row. And so we needed some variables to do that. And so we used the with expression to get these variables that we need. So that's the way around it in low-code plugins. But let's go into our model-driven app and let's see this automated plugin.
Nathan, just super duper quickly, mate. We've had a question in the chat. Can you use automated plugins to calculate roll-up value in real time?
That's a great question. It's something I've been thinking about. I suspect you probably could. But yeah, that's a great question, and something that I've been thinking about, because they've been talking about calculated columns doing roll-ups, and I haven't seen anything in the Maker portal letting you do that, and I suspect low-code plugins would probably be the way to go for that. So you'd probably just do count rows with a filter or something like that. And so I haven't tried it myself yet, but it's been something that's been kicking around in my brain, and something I'm keen to give it a try. So I think you probably could.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No more questions in the chat at the moment.
Cool. Okay. All right, let's go to the model-driven app and go. And let's create. So I've got this PFX test table, and what I'm going to do is we'll create one of these rows. So when I create it, it's going to give us the weather for the city we stipulate. It'll give us a joke. It'll give us a Ron Swanson quote, because Ron Swanson quotes are awesome, some random trivia, and it'll set the name of our row. So let's go ahead and create a new one here. So where's everybody based? Everybody based in Edinburgh or Glasgow?
I'm Edinburgh with a Glasgow accent, so I'll just confuse everybody.
Edinburgh for
Let's
me
go-
as well.
Let's go with that. Let's go with Edinburgh. Cool. All right. When I first did this, I had a currency conversion custom connector. That's why I've got these here, but it tends to throw temper tantrums, so I've taken that out of the code for now. So let's go ahead and save this, and we'll see the plugins run. There we go. Okay, so it's named our row, so it's counted the rows in the test table and given it a name based on that. It's given us a terrible dad joke. So somebody confirm, is it in fact cloudy in Edinburgh at the moment?
It's always worth a guess.
Yeah. I'd use I would have used Auckland, but it would have just said dark. So we got an epic Ron Swanson quote and some random trivia. So that's the plugin in action. So it's calling a bunch of connectors. Now you might notice that the record is a little bit slow to save. That's because we've got this synchronous process running. So that record is completely off limits until the plugin has run and done its thing. So it takes a little bit longer to save records when you've got these synchronous processes running. So that's the automated plugin. Let's kick it up a notch. Let's get a little irresponsible and see these things working with Power Automate. So I've got a couple of cloud flows. So you can do this either way with Power Automate. So you can either call plugins from Power Automate, or you can call Power Automate from the plugin. So let's tell you what, let's do this one first. This is an idea I've been kicking around. This idea of using Power Automate as an orchestration engine for a number of plugins. So we're starting to get limits in terms of the web API and running Power Automate and whatnot. Microsoft is starting to introduce those. And so I've been thinking about, okay, what if you've got some real data intensive stuff that you need to do? So we recently did a project here in New Zealand where we had some really data intensive flows running. And so something I've been thinking about is, okay, what if we used the plugin on the table to do some of the heavy lifting for us, and then just let Power Automate be the orchestration engine, and then update the row when we're done. So this is going to do something very similar to what we just saw on the instant plugin, but it's going to call a bunch of instant ones. So we're going to set the name on the table. We're going to get some random trivia, get the weather, and we're going to do a calculation, and then we're going to update our row with all of these details. So this flow gets kicked off when I add a test table row in Dataverse. I called it test table because I can't spell chrysanthemum, and it's going to run this flow as a orchestration engine for all of these different plugins. Let's go back to the model-driven app.
Just a question popped into the chat, Nathan. Are low-code plugins similar to PCF controls in the sense that you need to be a premium user, or does licensing depend on what connectors you're using?
Yeah, great question. So you do need a premium Dataverse license to use these.
is that based on the accessing the Dataverse Accelerator app, needing a Dataverse license, basically?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So you've got to be on Dataverse in order to use these. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to our test table and let's create one. All right. So let's give it some just simple math. Should we get the weather in Glasgow? And let's see if we've triggered our plugin to run. There we go, it's running. So you can see it's a little bit slower, but it's run. Let's come back to our record and refresh. Okay, so we've got a name for the row. We've got some trivia. Apparently it's cloudy in Glasgow, and we've got our calculation. So this is a bunch of instant plugins being orchestrated by Power Automate to run this. So I guess one of the questions that I got when I was presenting this last year was, can you execute plugins asynchronously? So with the traditional C# plugins, you can choose whether you want them to be synchronous or async. That probably goes back to the days before we had tools like Classic Workflow and whatnot, where plugins were the only way to do things. So this would be a way to do that, to have a synchronous process that you call asynchronously via Power Automate, or just as an orchestration engine to do some data heavy stuff. So that's Power Automate calling a bunch of plugins and doing stuff with it. Let's just see, did it get it right? 180 rows, yeah, awesome. Okay, but let's do it the other way around. What if we want to synchronously call an async process? So we want the plugin to run, and then we want it to go ahead and call Power Automate and do something. So I've got this. We just looked at this a second ago. This is an instant plugin that creates a sales invoice from an order in my system, and then what it's going to do is it's going to call this flow. It's just doing something really simple. We're just going to update the record with the string flows updated row with a timestamp, just to prove that we can do it. So if we come, so it's going to be triggered from my Canvas app here. So this is my low-code plugin. Oh, something that I didn't show you in the Dataverse Accelerator app. This is very cool. When you are using instant plugins, there is something here in the ribbon called Copy Code Snippet. And I'll just pop up my notepad here. This gives you the plugin expression that you're going to need in the Canvas app. So it makes it really easy to go over to your Canvas app and just paste it in, and then enter in the parameters that it requires. So it's a really nice feature from Microsoft. But this is the plugin that we're going to run. So we'll just come here. We'll just review quickly what it's going to do. So this row is basically going to take our sales order, and it's going to create a sales invoice row related to it. So that's it's going to create this invoice related to that sales order row. And then so once that happens, it's going to trigger Power Automate to go and update this parent update our parent sales order row. So it's going to just stick a message here. So the plugin's going to create a row here, and then the Cloudflow is going to update our row here. So let's go ahead and run this thing. So hold down the Alt key. And let's come over here and see if our plugin has, or see if our Cloudflow has triggered. All right, so that's run, and let's come back to model-driven app. And you can see that we got a update from Power Automate, and it's created a row for us. So that's going the other way around. So if you want, again, if you had a process that's asynchronous, but it needs to be called in a synchronous way, that's how you could do that. So that's Power Automate interacting with low-code plugins. The last thing I'll show you, just conscious of time, is this working with the CLI in the PowerFX CLI. So for those of you who are a bit more hands-on pro code CLI types, this is something that I just got my head around a few weeks ago. Rami, who's a fellow MVP here in New Zealand, got me into this. I thought CLI was a detective series on Netflix, and then he showed me what it does, and I got pretty excited about it. So this lets us create, update, do all kinds of stuff with PowerFX in Dataverse from this command line interface. And the cool thing is that we can trigger low-code plugins from it as well. So I'll show you how that works. Now it's kind of cheating because kind of like, with Power Automate, we're just going to trigger a Dataverse update that's going to trigger the low-code plugin, but we'll still take credit. So let me go and copy paste this into the command line. So this is going to create, same way we did in a few minutes ago, we're going to create this test table row. It's going to set the trigger plugin to yes, get us the weather in Edinburgh, give us some numbers to calculate and the weather unit, and that's going to trigger the plugin, give the plugin everything it needs to go and run. One thing that I will call out, I discovered this the other day. Working with choice and Boolean columns in PowerFX just sucks. Like I hate it. It's really, really, they just, I don't know, they're not easy. What's really cool is I wrote this expression in a Canvas app and I copy pasted it here and it worked. So instead of trying to work out what the CLI wants, just write your expression in a Canvas app, copy paste it here, it will work. So that's like, I don't know, I'm really excited. It's the best thing ever. So will make your life so much easier. But let's go ahead and run this. All right, so it's gone and created a row for us. Let's go back to all right, so it's created the row, and you can see that the plugins run a calculation. We've got the weather in Edinburgh. We've got some trivia, and it's named it. So we've run that from the CLI. It's created the row and triggered the plugin to run. So that's the last thing I was gonna take you through. So some cool stuff that you can do with low-code plugins. Okay, go back to my slides. Are there any questions before I carry on?
I have one if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm a big fan of like modern commanding, and it's using lots of the same PowerFX type things. The reason I thought of was that set, because you can't use set modern commanding, you have to use with. So is there and the nice thing about it is it refreshes the table for you. So have you got a view on when to use modern commanding versus the plugin?
Yeah, great question. So modern commanding is something that generally, so my view is that modern commanding is going to be used when the user needs to do something. I want a button that does. My view of it is I like to avoid it where possible. I like to automate wherever possible. The reality is, I'm sure you found on a project, you're like, we can automate that, and the user's like, but what would I do all day? No, I want a button that does. And so that's where modern commanding comes into play. The last I checked, low-code plugins don't work with modern commands. That may have changed. So what you would need to do if you wanted to say I assume you're asking about calling a low-code plugin from a modern command?
Sorry, I just lost my Wi-Fi when you're talking there.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, are you asking about calling a low-code plugin from a modern command? Or when you should use one or the other?
Instead of, because when I was looking at your code,
Yep.
you know, the patch code, that's very similar to the kind of patch code I would write in a modern commanding button.
Yep. Yeah. So the beauty of PowerFX is that those expressions work wherever you're working in the Power Platform, right? So whether you're using a modern command or a low-code plugin, but you ask a really good question, right? Should I use a command or should I use a plugin? I would. So at the moment, I'll need to check this again. You can't call the plugin from the command. So if you needed the user to click a button to then kick off a process, at the moment, that doesn't appear to be supported. I've asked about it, so that may have changed. So you would be one or the other, but you would use a plugin when you need something just happening, right? An automated process. Whereas the modern command is the user clicks the button to do something. So, and again, if you were patching to Dataverse or something like that, you'd probably just have the patch statement in the modern command. There wouldn't be a lot of need to go call a plugin unless you had some other stuff that you were trying to do with it. So, you know, if you were, let's say you were calling a connector to bring some data in to manipulate it and then patch to Dataverse or something like that. So hope that makes sense. Cool.
And we do have another question from Parvex as
go for it.
well. Are there any limitations on which connectors can be used in PowerFX's expression logic of low-code plugins?
Great question, Parvez. So I assume you're asking about the external connectors, Mike?
Any connector really, because I mean, just thinking about this in comparison to traditional plugins, which ran in what was called a sandbox kind of state, where you had limitations on what you could and couldn't do in the plugin logic itself. So, wondering if there's similar limitations for low-code plugins when you're calling a connector.
Yeah, great question. I don't know. I know that there theoretically there's no limit on the number of connectors that you can call. So I mean, I guess, you know, you're kind of limited by what's going to run in that 2-minute timeout. So yeah, but yeah, I don't think there's any limits on the connectors that you can use. I've had some difficulty with custom connectors. Some of them work and some of them don't. So it's there. Yeah, so the custom connectors are a bit tricky, but yeah, I haven't seen any limitations on other connectors. But yeah, it's a great question.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, cool. Okay. All right, so we've gone through the demo. All right, when should you use a low-code or a traditional plugin? Well, it's actually a trick question because low-code plugins are not GA yet, so you should be using traditional plugins if you need one on your project. But the breakdown between them is low-code plugins are great. You know, once they're GA, obviously, if you need synchronous logic and you don't have pro devs available, assuming PowerFX supports what you're trying to do in the plugin. This is a key one. You don't need to filter by attribute. So traditional plugins, if you get into the XRM toolbox in the plugin step, you can choose which attributes on the table trigger the plugin. Low-code plugins don't do that. So they will trigger on basically update of the row. And then it's up to you to put a if or switch or something like that in your plugin to say, if these criteria match, then do your thing, otherwise don't. Another key thing is these can't be sequenced. So at least the instant ones can't. So the instant ones, you can't sequence them. Piotr, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. You mentioned that they would trigger on every single update. So one of the examples you showed that there was like 5 different patches. So it means that if you had a plugin that triggered on that particular table, it would trigger 5 times. Is that correct? I mean, obviously, if you would update the role.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. We probably have to set up auditing and take a look at what's actually happening with that. You raise a good point. There's a really good LinkedIn post from Rob Wood, who's a fast track solution architect, who has done some performance testing on these, and the interesting thing is that they take about twice as long to execute as a traditional plugin, and I suspect some of that attribute filtering may be why. So yeah, just something to be cognizant of is that you can't do that at the moment. So I have found with the automated plugins, having more than one per table can be problematic. They can, when they first came out, you could only have one per table. I've found now that if you have more than one, they don't always agree, and they can give you some errors. And again, they don't support async logic. So again, your traditional plugins, you're going to need ProDev support. If you have functionality that exceeds what PowerFX can do, these do let you filter by attribute, sequence them, have as many as you want on the table, can be run sync or async. And again, they do perform better than the low-code plugins right now. I suspect as this gets closer to GA, Microsoft will probably start to look at performance a bit. All right, so we'll wrap up.
Mention from Rob Wood is in the chat now, Nathan.
Yep. Oh, brilliant! Yeah, it is a really good post. Yeah,
I remembered it. When you mentioned it, I knew I saw it. Really great post here. There's also a secondary question from Piotr. Any experience with offloading heavy workloads to an Azure function from a low-code plugin? Is that something that's possible? Or?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. That's a really good question. I've never thought about that before. I don't see why you couldn't, because it supports. So there's Azure connectors that are in your connections. There are Azure connectors, and you could create it. And I guess you could create a custom connector to Azure. Yeah, I would love to try it. Unfortunately, I'm not a pro dev by trade, so but if you wanted to get into that and collaborate on it, I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to get into it because that would be pretty cool. Yeah. Okay. So just some random tips and tricks as we wrap up. Be careful combining automated plugins with other automated processes. So I tend to create automated automated plugins and then forget about them and then create a Cloudflow and then wonder why the Cloudflow fails. If the plugin doesn't agree with what the Cloudflow is trying to do, you will get some errors. So just be really careful about that. Again, the custom connectors are really fiddly. So you have to go through, there's a bit of a party trick. You've got to add them to the default solution. And then even then it doesn't always work. So when you're creating rows, you use collect instead of patch defaults. So you'd use patch defaults in a Canvas app that's not supported in low-code plugins. You've got to use the collect statement. And then the set is no longer supported, so you've got to use patch for your updates on a row. Another thing that's kind of interesting is concatenate doesn't always play nicely. So string interpolation is your friend when you're trying to set string values in a low-code plugin. It tends to work a little bit better. All right, again, when troubleshooting, Canvas apps are your friends. With is incredibly useful when you need a variable in a low-code plugin. They don't let you set variables like a Canvas app does, but the with expression will get you around it. This is something that it's in the docs now, but it wasn't really clear when this first came out. When you're working with an instant plugin that has an output parameter, you've got to declare that in your expression. So you'll have curly bracket output parameter and then your PowerFX formula to get that output parameter. Otherwise, the plugin won't work. Again, you need premium licensing for the Dataverse Accelerator app. And this is an interesting one. So plugin executions will contribute towards your service protection limits in Dataverse, but they don't consume web API calls. So they actually use IORG. So for your more data intensive stuff, they could be a good place to offload workload to save web API calls. So that pretty much brings us to the end of what I had for us today. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention. Are there any questions before I hand over to Dev?
And we're going to hand over to Josh if there's no questions, if that's okay.
Cool.
But yeah, your timing's impeccable, mate. 59 minutes for a 1 hour session is unheard of. Great session, mate. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Any
Thanks,
questions,
everyone.
anyone, before we hand over to Josh? No, Josh, go ahead, mate.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. That was a fantastic session. I think
Cheers.
everyone's learned something brilliant from that. So yeah, brilliant. So our next speaker hand over to is Devendra. If you want to introduce yourself.
I think you might be stuck on mute, Devendra. We can see slides, but still mute.
Oh, no, sorry.
Right. Perfect. All good, man.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Devendra Velegandla, based in Perth. I'll be talking about managed environments today. There are quite new things that have been released in terms of managed environments. So we'll get into why managed environments and other things. But let's go to the next one. Yeah, this is a little bit about me. I studied electrical and electronics for 6 years and then get into the IT, so which is interesting. It took some time to get into IT, understand the concepts, but then my journey was towards SharePoint for a long time. That's where I was part of the Microsoft MVP for 5 years. And then in 2018, I did a transition to Power Platform. And again, it wasn't easy for the first few years, which I'm going to talk about some of the learnings in terms of the governance and administration. But currently, I'm working as an architect, helping people in the business to build the solutions. So that's the main thing that I'm doing now. In my free time, I watch quite a lot of cricket, but mostly test cricket. But we got a couple of young kids at home, so just doing doodling, especially my younger one, like, okay, sit with me and do doodling. So yeah, that's the fun stuff. So talking about managed environments, there is a lot of talk on challenges with managing platform, and we will be seeing like why managed environments came into picture. And also, I just briefly wanted to talk about evaluation of governance tools, and then the features. And I got a few demos that are planned, so probably I think I'll show some of the demos. So I just wanted to make it very clear, maybe a confession. So I don't know everything about managed environments. There are quite a lot of new things that has been released. So as I'm learning, so we also enabled quite a few of them in our workplace. So I'm happy to chat with any questions that you got. If you are using managed environments, so feel free to put it in the chat. So yeah, I just wanted to make it clear. But then if you go to the next one, so mostly it's all about the people, right? So that's one of the important things to understand. You got a lot of people in the business who are very well-known makers, And there would be new makers who doesn't know Power Platform. So it's always the case. And most probably you might have just one administrator managing everything. And also he might not be even doing the full-time Power Platform administration. Some of them would be doing SharePoint admins, moving to Power Platform admins, and then doing something else along with managing the platform. The challenge is when you got few people, it's easy to manage, but as in you got hundreds, thousands, and that kept on increasing, a lot of people building solutions. That's where the challenge lies. So I'll show some of the users, what's the experience is all going to be when they land into Maker Portal and why that is a challenge, right? So let's get into quick demo. So I got an admin. So in this case, it is me. So I'm in the Power Platform Admin Center. And there are a few things by default. If you're not an admin or if you're an admin, so you might know pretty well. So this is where you would be spending a lot of time, which is tenant settings. So one of the setting is developer environment assignments, where most of the times you might have said only specific admins can create environments, not everyone. There is a reason because you don't want everyone to create a lot of environments, which is again a challenge to manage. So if this is the default setting, and then I got few makers, few test users. Now, these are the existing makers. Now, let's say if they go and open make.powerapps.com. So what happens is they all end up in the default environment. The interesting thing is the business users doesn't understand a lot of technical terms. We can call it as jargon or anything that you wanted to call it. They not even look at what's all here, right? They don't understand what is environment and all those things. In fact, they might not even reached here by using make.powerapps.com. They might have been clicking on this quick launch and then maybe accessed or went to Office landing page, Microsoft 365 landing page, and then accessed Power Apps. So it could be the same with Power Automate as well. So then they'll come here and build apps. So this particular user has built an app. Now I build an app. Now I'm excited. So I'm going to click on share. And then I can just share with everyone. So there is no stopping of doing this. That's one of the challenge. This could be everyone in the company. Now imagine you got 100 people. It's okay, but still a big thing. But now you got 10,000 people, and you got maybe hundreds of them making these apps, and everyone is sharing with some of the larger groups. So you can imagine what's happening, right? It's going to be the same experience even if I switch back to one more user here, different user, but you get the same experience. Most of them ending in the default environment. So that's the challenge. Whereas in everyone trying to build solutions without noticing they are in the one particular environment and everything is getting built in the default environment. And you got only one admin who is managing everything of this, right? Also, it's not only building solutions and sharing with a lot of people, but then some of these potentially will never get used. I might be building a lot of apps and flows. I might have attended some trainings within the organization, and then a lot of them will get unused. Over a period of time, they get died as well. So that's the other challenge. There would be heaps of them, and then I can't delete the default environment. So that's the other thing. There is always a challenge where everyone can access. I'm sure you might have seen the other challenges with the default environment as well. Yeah, let me know in the chat if you have seen anything specific. Also, with the challenges, Microsoft realized later they should introduce some best practices. So they said why not rename to personal productivity? That means these environments, or the particular default environment, is specific to personal solutions. That is only for myself, not for everyone else. But as you saw just now, I don't care about what's environment I am in. If I am a end user, I even don't understand if it is a personal productivity, what is personal productivity, until unless the admins create a lot of documentation. You got a SharePoint site, you might have sent even the welcome email, but still that's a challenge. But then the next best practice would be minimizing the number of connectors. So connectors are the way you could connect with the data. So you could reduce that, but still there would be heaps of them getting created. At least in my experience, I have seen a lot of them getting created, even with standard connectors. So I work with large enterprise, and there are thousands of makers. And even if you think of few standard connectors, there would be heaps of them, solutions getting created. And then there was a recommendation on cleaning up some of the unused solutions. There is a starter kit, but starter kit got its own challenges. Let's say you build 100 apps and all of them not being used, then after some time, you'll get an email saying that 100 emails saying that you need to clean up those. It's not efficient for the large enterprises, but mostly I think it's all reactive. So someone logged in, build a solution, and then you go and manage it rather than doing proactively. So that's the main challenge, despite having best practices, right? So when I say reactive governance, yeah, these are all the things will be part of those reactive governance. There could be solutions that has been shared with large groups, even everyone in the organization, and people not following the guidelines. Some of these solutions could be very critical for the organization, but they haven't been following guidelines, which again, as an admin, you're going to react. And then there was no quality checks being done by makers. Again, the admins would be pretty much reacting to what has been done. So that's one of the major challenge if you're working with a large enterprises as an admin, and you got a lot of makers building solutions. Also, the admins, like I mentioned about myself, the background they come to as an admin role is quite different. Some of them might be like, okay, you know SharePoint administration now. Can you manage Power Platform administration? So a lot of times there was no dedicated roles, but now I'm seeing that is being changed slowly. So which is good. But let's say you're also just doing a lot of other things and then managing the platform, it's going to be quite challenging for you. I'm sure you might have seen the similar kind of roles. And just to understand a bit more about the problem, if you look at early stages, so maybe back in 2018, that's where I started with Power Platform. You have very few active users. You will hardly have any environments. So even now, any new organization that is starting with Power Platform, this is what you see: a very few users, a few people building solutions, only few solutions. But then after a few years, what happens is they learn more about Power Platform, and a lot of people get excited, and then the active user base will keep on increasing because you have seen in the default environment, everyone can go ahead and build solutions. And people tell about other people, right? Okay, I built this solution. It's not taking a lot of time. I don't have to depend on IT. And then there will be a need for different environments, application lifecycle management, etc., etc. And then so is the applications. So it will gradually increase over a period of time, right? But then what Microsoft realized is there are a lot of adoption in terms of how people are using. So over a period of time, they introduced a few set of tools. So in 2018, you got only PowerShell. I remember in my first Power Platform project, I had to run a PowerShell to get the inventory, but then you don't have starter kit back then. And luckily in 2019, with Manuel on team, they introduced starter kit. And then that helped to understand what's happening within the tenant. That wasn't the case until then. I have seen where people don't know what's within the Power Platform. Even now, people who are just starting with Power Platform journey, they think that people are not building solutions. But most of the people who are having just M365, they got seeded license and people are building solutions. So that's the other thing. Just looking at the chat. There's a question from Shane. Do you have convenient environment best practice document or checklist you provide IT admin? Yes, I think there is a lot of good documentation with Microsoft, but currently what we are trying to do is we are trying to even create a admin training, because we are seeing a lot of business people building solutions. But someone like Power Platform admin, yeah, I'm happy to share that one, Shane, because myself, I am an admin in my current role, so happy to do that. Okay. With the starter kit, so probably I'll show you why starter kit is good, but then there are still a few things that needs to be considered. I'm not sure how many of you seen the starter kit, but let me quickly show you and what it looks like and what is actually provided. So I got starter kit here. Just hoping this is going to be up and running. Come on. It's still loading. That's why I got a backup video if the internet doesn't help much, but hopefully this should be up. I'll go off on the video. Okay, there you go. Hopefully you can see the left navigation, at least for now, while the other sections are loading. This is the starter kit admin view app, where it's going to tell you exactly who are all the makers that are actually building solutions. So in this case, it's my tenant, so you will see my name. But there are a lot of other apps that say system, and then I got few test users, so you can see they're building apps, and also you got flow makers. There are a few people building the flows. So it also gives at each environment level how many apps and flows. So mostly you might see everything just these big towers against the personal productivity environment. That's where most of the people would be ending up on building solutions. So this will give you a overall view about what it looks like. But then you can go ahead and look at different environments that are part of the tenant. So in this case, I got few of them while I was testing. And it also shows how many apps and flows within that environment. And is there any security group assigned to that environment? And if I click on edit columns, so I could add a lot more information about that particular environment. So there is a metadata associated with each of that. But then if I go to a default environment, so you can see there is a related metadata, and I can look at some of the flows apps. So I can click on what are the power apps within that environment. So I'll be able to see the information about power app, and then I can further click on the power app. It's a model driven app, so you could see how it is working, and then I could again go and find out what are the solutions this app is consist of, or I can just go back and look for all the information. So you get pretty much a complete view about your tenant. So you can get environment capacity, which environment is consuming quite a lot. So based on that, if you want to purchase additional capacity, you can do that. And also you can see the information about makers, who are the makers that are building solutions and what they're building and how many apps and flows they are building. But the tool is great. Still, this is going to be all reactive. So someone will build it, then you will be able to see it. Because the starter kit works on a mechanism where you got a lot of Power Automate flows that runs on a schedule basis, and then it pulls the information. So that's the challenge, even with starter kit. And also, while I was working with one of the automation, which is for the environment request automation. So what happened was, we were trying to automate the environment. I just wanted to talk about mainly the number of core components. And I was trying to add some of those environments to a DLP policy using Power Automate, but then I couldn't able to figure it out what's the best option. And then my colleague said, there is already a flow that can do within starter kit. But then I realized, oh, okay, I pretty much spent 2-3 days figuring it out. But then the reason is in 2019, I think there were like 100 objects within starter kit. But now, if I look at as on last month when I upgraded, it's like 400 components, or the objects rather. So it's almost like 4 times the starter kit has grown. There are a lot of features has been added. It's great, and it's fantastic. But the problem is you need to keep up with all the changes that you need to manage, upgrade. And again, like I mentioned, it's all reactive governance. So with all these challenges, then also in the future state, again, I'm just guessing here. You could correct me if I'm wrong. With the Copilot AI, it's going to be a lot more applications, a lot more people would be using. Now you can just give prompts and people can build solutions. So I'm expecting even yesterday PowerFX, where you got GitHub Copilot feature. So a lot of people are going to understand how to build solutions, and then this is going to be more solutions will be developed in future. So that's where I think managed environments is going to play a big role, because it's going to help you sharing limits. So you can restrict who can share what, how many people can access those apps, whether they could share with the security groups, and then what's happening within the tenant with the usage insights. And there are a long list of features. Pipelines is definitely my favorite, because I have seen a lot of business users struggle to even understand what is solution. And then there is extended backup. So I'm going to show you some of these rather than talking about list of features. But then there are quite a few preview features. So I think it's going to be much more easier. I show this, then I'll talk about what each feature does. Right. So let's get to the demo. So within the admin center, I hope you all can see the admin center. The first thing you have to do is, we see the problem with managed the people managing Power Platform is the default environment. So what you need to do is you basically go and enable the developer environment setting. I hope I clicked save. Yeah. So now everyone can create developer environments. And then the next one is the environment routing. So this is where what happens is when you enable this feature, again, this is in preview. Don't do it in your production environment yet. So maybe if you got a test tenant, so you can try these features. This is still in preview. So when you toggle this on, you get an option where either you wanted to root the people, like everyone in the company, or only the new makers. New makers is the ones who didn't develop any apps or flows, any solutions within Power Platform. And then you have a concept called environment group. So what you can do is you can basically group into 3 sections. But of course, I think this might change in future. So you'll have people in the business developing solutions. And then there would be partners developing solutions, which could be ProDev. And then you have a group specific to developer environments. So in this case, when someone try to access Maker portal, I just wanted to redirect them to the developer environments. And then you got a setting called security group. So you can restrict people based on a particular security group. So in this case, I leave that for none. So everyone can go ahead and test that. And I'll even use all makers so that we can see the experience with environment routing. So once that is done, so I'll go back and check if that is enabled. Yep, it's all good. This would be the first setting that you would do while leveraging all the other features. Now, if I go here for the existing makers, maybe I'll try to reload this page. Now you can see from the default environment, what happens is this particular user got redirected to a developer environment, which is specific to that user. And also there is a welcome message that shows welcome to your developer environment. And then the restriction is you can have your own guidelines. It depends on the department that you work or the group that you have. So you can say you can't share anything from the developer environment. And then there could be other information specific to your company. So you can do that, right? I'll show you how this was done, but you can quickly see the experience for this particular user. This was the other user who was again the existing maker. Now I'm going to try to refresh, and you can see that user again landed in the own developer environment. So that's the experience for the existing makers who are already building solutions. Now I got a new maker. Yep, someone got hung up, sorry. Yeah, can you define, okay, I'm just looking at the chat. Can you define your own environment groups? Yes, Parvez, I'll show that in a moment. You can create your own environment groups. The one that I create or shown was created by me. So it doesn't come with by default. Yeah. Okay, so now this is the new maker. Now, if I go and say make.powerapps.com with this particular account, so what it does is it tries to provision the developer environment. So you can see it tries to go to default environment, but then it realizes that this particular user doesn't have any developer environment. So now in minute or two, we should have a developer environment for that particular user. So that's the experience you get with the new makers. So you can see the environment got provisioned, and then the user also see the welcome email, welcome notification where it's again the welcome message is in preview, but you can see the idea behind what Microsoft is trying to do. So the guidelines are pretty clear what they can do, what they can't do. So much more helpful rather than the previous experience. Right. Now, what happened behind the scenes is, so you got a section called environment groups here. So within the environment groups, we selected a developer environments. Now you can see I got that particular environment added to this particular group with the name of the user who logged in, right? And also every group will come with default set of rules. And the first rule is sharing controls. By default, it's going to be don't set any limits, but you can exclude sharing with security groups. And then you can further restrict how many people they can share the app with. So you can define that for each group, in fact. And then
Devendra, just a quick question that feels appropriate at this moment in time. Can you define your own environment groups, or are the groups defined for you and you have no control over them? So you've got here like an environment group called developer environments. Was that system created or did you create it?
Yeah, this was created by me. So everything. So you get blank canvas. You won't get any groups. So I went ahead and created group and just gave the description.
We've got a couple of hands up as well from a few people. Piotr?
Yes, I was trying to write in chat, but for some reason it says I'm restricted from replying to this chat. The question is regarding the sort of managed environments. I started to play a little bit with the groups, but what happens, I would like to enable the managed environment, but as far as I remember, it requires every user to have a premium license. Is that correct?
Yes, everyone who is building solutions within that managed environment, yes.
Okay, so it has to be premium license, or is for example, we have E3 or E5 licenses, and they both come with Power Apps and Power Automate licenses for developers.
Yeah,
are those the proper licenses, or?
Sorry to interrupt. We seem to have lost Devendra for a second. I can answer that question though. Irrespective of which connectors you're using, even things like SharePoint and the free connectors that come with E3 and E5, all applies. You all need premium licensing, so Power Apps Premium or something along those lines.
Correct.
Okay, so in the other words, if I would enable that for environment where I know there might be people who don't necessarily have the premium license, they would be kicked off, or how would that work?
They would effectively get a message saying you don't have a license.
All right,
that's my understanding.
Fair enough. I'll give it a try on some tests and see what's going to happen.
I think Devendra's back as well. Are you with us, Devendra?
Yeah. Can you hear us now?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you now, mate. Yeah. And we've got another couple of questions. James Friel?
James?
Yeah, just a quick one. When you're talking about developer environments, are you talking about the classic developer environment from Microsoft, which doesn't take any storage out of your allowance, or is that just a name you've called it? So each developer environment is going to take at least a gig of storage off your allowance?
Yeah, it's still the developer environment, but the thing is, it just becomes managed when you use environment routing, but it's not going to be part of the storage.
So zero overhead. Perfect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So just to build on this is an environment of type developer, not a sandbox environment used for developing. Was that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. That's right.
Thank you.
So,
and Sean?
So you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, if this question isn't super relevant to this, totally understand it. We get into a lot of issues where we need to migrate production data to like a dev environment or more a UAT environment to kind of like test things out. And obviously we might have emails, social security numbers, classified stuff. So we don't want to just copy the environment over. Do you know if there's any out of the box things where you copy it over, but maybe, I think the term is salt, but like hide certain fields, or like those are not necessarily hide, but like don't migrate certain columns or certain sensitive data?
Yeah, I think Microsoft is trying to do field masking, but I don't I don't know any option where we could copy only specific fields. I'm not sure if anyone knows that in this call, but I haven't seen
what
that.
You could do is use something like configuration management tool and just select the fields that you want and consequently not select the fields you don't want. I'm not aware of anything under managed environments.
Yeah.
Field masking will prevent certain users from seeing certain things,
Seeing it.
but wouldn't prevent it from being migrated.
Right, and with field masking, I'm trying not to
one
like touch anything. I'm trying to like the environment needs to be exactly the same, so the fields need to be exactly the same. I just was hoping with like, you know, data loss prevention, you can prevent like emails or something being exported, something like that. So I was hoping that there was something like this if y'all knew anything.
Yeah, configuration management is probably the easiest one, I would say. I know
Yeah.
James has popped in the chat as well a similar message there.
Yeah, the other thing I've used in the past is I've played with it quite useful is use data pipelines. You can essentially chunk it into Power Query and just A to Z all the columns. So the data's all there. It's just not that same person anymore. So the person's first name, last name, address, all these things get jumbled up. So you have, you know, data. It's just no longer personally identifiable.
Nice. So you kind of massaged it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was that using a data flow to connect between the two environments and then using Power Query to change the words so it no longer says Stuart Baxter, it says blah, 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 basically?
It literally, you drop the contact table into Power Query, just A to Z the columns. So instead of being Stuart Baxter, it'll become Stuart Alfonso Zachariah. So just take the real data, but A to Z each one. The other thing you do in Power Query is you can replace that column with random data. So you can say this column is their national insurance number. So I'm just going to randomize that column on the way through. You know, so it's quite a handy tool. Data flows for kind of just messing about with data on the way in and out of these kind of things. But config manager's as good as any because you can just reuse it over and over again. We use it a lot for moving reference data through as part of a standard pipeline. A nice thing about that
sounds like a future session from you, James. I think you should come back in a couple of months' time and present on that now. Sorry to cut across, just conscious of time. I'm just going to hand back to Devendra if that's okay. And just in the interest of getting through the session. If you want to pick up offline on this, by all means do reach out and we can have a chat though.
Okay. Thanks. I'm back now. So just looking at the developer environments, yeah, it doesn't cost you the storage, so it's not going to be the sandbox type or the other environment types. That's going to be the key. The only difference would be when you enable environment routing, they become managed, right? But then there is a next one. As part of the rules, I haven't seen the additional rules that can be created, but these are the 6 rules that are available. And the usage insights are very valuable. So what I found is a lot of times Starter Kit doesn't provide you information about the top usage flows. So there was one instance where one particular user is running the flow when an item is updated and again doing an update action. So that particular flow was running forever. And we came to know quite later because the only option for you now is go to the report center and then download the report. But with the usage insights, I think it's much more easier. So I was trying to see what it looks like. This was a few weeks before I didn't have any managed environments, but this is how it looks like. But then after a few weeks, so you'll be able to see how many active apps, active flows. So this could be quite a big number, depends on the tenant you're working on. And it shows the information about what are the most popular apps. And then the idea behind these ones is you can go and talk to the people. Do they need support? Do they need to transition them to the other teams? and also the flows. So in this case, I was trying to do the same thing, a few test flows, and you can see the number of runs, and then you can go and click on that particular link. It will directly show the flow details within the environment and what are the actions that are being used, etc. So you can have that conversation with the people and understand what's the challenge with those particular assets, right? So you can quickly enable or disable from here if you see that there is some issue. So that's the advantage with the insights, right? So you could also add additional participants as part of the insights. So if you got a team, so you can just add multiple people within that particular email. So all of them can receive the details. Just going back to the groups, and you got few more rules. This is the other one that you have seen, the welcome content. So this I find it very helpful. Let's say you got a particular department who is building solutions, and then yeah, you can have your own info about that particular department and what are the rules they need to follow. Solution checker is a good one, but again, I don't want to get emails left and right if I got a large user base. But also, you need to be watchful about enabling this. If you got old solutions, so then those solutions might get stopped working. And yeah, my favorite one is definitely the backup retention. So earlier it was always 7 days, and you have to go and ask support team if they got the backup prior to that. But now you can enable it up to 28 days. I think I'm getting to know this could increase further, maybe in future, maybe 60 days. I don't know, but currently you got it for 28 days. And the last one is AI generated description. Let's say your maker build an app or flow, then you can generate description. But this may not be ideal because the AI doesn't understand everything that your company work with or the makers building solutions. So your makers still need to go back and update the description. So it may not be perfect. And again, a lot of these features are still in preview. So you can see out of 6, 3 are still in preview. So please try to test those as you go through. But then
just a very quick question on the AI generated descriptions.
Yep.
Are these very similar to on Power Platform pipelines? Which I know you probably want to speak about at some point. It generates the description of what's in it. And it's my experience with them is sometimes it's great, sometimes it's rubbish, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Are you seeing similar with this as well? Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not accurate. That's where I think when we have the guidelines, I think we should tell the makers not to trust and rather update it what they are building. Yeah. And I think the pipeline
I feel like an automatically generated one that is gibberish is probably more useful than nothing. If anything, all it's going to do is the people who do read the description then go to the maker and say, what does this actually do? Whereas if there's no description, they've no clue and they don't even know who to ask. So it's an interesting one, this, isn't it?
Yeah. Hopefully this will get better when the Copilot understand more about the tenant and applications that are being built. And also a lot of Copilot features are in preview. I think Microsoft is going to make it mandatory rather than opting out. So once they do that, I think these features might be better. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, for the groups, I think you won't get any of these by default. I was just experimenting. But then also how you could use groups is if you got an environment and let's say you don't have any environment provisioning process. So if you click on new, so you can still choose a group here. So you're building a particular creating a development or production environment. for your business makers. So you can create those environments and select the group. So that's the new addition that got added. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of charts going on. Is it mostly on the migration part? Anything?
Still
Okay,
a kind
cool,
of side
cool.
conversation on the migration stuff. Yeah, no questions for you at the moment.
Nice, awesome. Okay, thanks.
A quick question.
Yeah, James. Yeah.
You showed there how you can take a new environment and kind of define the group. Can we move if someone was in a dev environment and that has a set of rules against it? Can we just reassign that environment, that instance, to a different set of groups? Just say you're now a business environment and have a different set of rules.
I think we should be able to change it. So I haven't tried. That's a good question, James. Let's go to.
If I remember right, it is in the same section as where you. So if you go to environments, yep, just like you're doing now, and then up the top where it's got open resources. So it's got open resources settings. I think you can change it in there. I'm sure it's in the same bit you changed the security group. I didn't see it pop in, pop out, and then pop back in. Not that one. If you close that edit details panel, you've got details that has the environment URL, and then see all and edit in the top right. Try that one. It's just the top right of that details.
I think it was the edit he's in. Yeah.
Oh, this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that will open this one basically.
That's annoying. Yeah. Interestingly, I did see it in there, and then not in there.
Maybe.
I think Microsoft are messing with it at the moment.
But
it is a preview feature and they're perfectly entitled to do that.
Other thing you could do, James, you go here, let's say you got it in the developer environment. So you can select this, remove from this group. So that will remove from the selected group. So you're basically removing the environment from the group and then go back to the other group and then add it.
Oh, this is like used to do for business units. You have to up them to a business unit above and then bring them back down again.
Yes, you can do that. And also the interesting thing is the rules that are being applied before your environment becomes managed environment. Let's say you got an app that is shared with a lot of people, it still works despite you apply the rules. So these rules are going to be enforced from the date you publish them. So for all the new solutions, that's the other thing to note. But yeah, from here, I think you should be able to add back the environments so you can look.
One quick question just to build on something you said a second ago. So if I have, for example, an environment that's not in this group and I have a rule in here that says usage insights is on, would that mean that any usage before today, when I added them to that group, wouldn't be counted? Or would it mean that it would just be from next week that they would be added in the usage insights?
I think the usage insights should show because it should show all the runs and everything because they're kind of using some of the out of the box features. But it's only the limit. That's what I understand. It still works. There is no disruptions, but usage insights should show from the beginning.
I think the sharing controls, as you said, like it's shared with 500 people, you apply it, it's not going to stop 480.
That's correct.
Whereas quarantining the apps through Starter Kit, for example, would block everyone from accessing it. So I suppose it's nice to see a stop further sharing and stop completely. There's two different options.
Yeah, and I guess in most scenarios, these would be going up the way. It'd be you're in a dev environment, we let you share with 3. We'll move you into the next environment up where we like to share it. We let you share it with a department, and then we might take over from a pro dev point of view, saying that was a really good app. Cheers, mate.
Yeah.
We'll have it from here.
Yeah, a good strategy. I like that.
I think there would be a lot of scenarios where some of these is going to be super useful, but I think like someone asked a question about licensing. That's where the things will get interesting. And also, if you see, Sorry.
I speak to a lot of my customers, and we're talking about the starter kit, and we keep on explaining the starter kit could be the single most complex thing in your entire environment. It could treble the size of number of apps and flows in your environment, just putting it in. That's why, like this, more and more we're seeing stuff that was starter kit.
Yep.
Just showing up in the kind of standard tooling.
That's right. That's right.
It's an interesting direction. Like we saw, going back a little while ago, we had the creator kit from PowerCat team, and that's now modern control.
Right. Yeah.
We then got the starter kit from them, and a lot of features are now coming into here.
Yep.
I feel like it might be a direction they're going. PowerCat to create some cool stuff, generate some interest, get Reza Durrani to put some videos out that everyone watches anyway, and then it just becomes a thing. The premium licensing thing's the difficult thing at the moment, as Dev said. Like talking customers around to spending thousands of pounds is the hard bit.
Because the environment request app, everyone has to have a premium license before you can get to that app to ask for an environment.
Yep.
So you already have to have every single person in the organization with a, per app, per user, as we like to call it, before that's even a thing.
Yeah, I think still the Power App per user. I get confused with the namings. Yeah, there is still per app license if you still wanted to leverage. But yeah, you're right, James. All the apps that uses Dataverse need license for everyone. Yeah.
I think this feels like it's targeted at companies like Network Rail. For anyone who spends a lot of time on LinkedIn, I'm sure you'll have seen Network Rail have got like 14,000 Power Apps out there, heavily using Dataverse. They basically don't use SharePoint at all anymore. They're already paying for Power Apps premium licenses for the whole business.
Nice.
And this helps them to govern it, whereas the opposite, where you've low numbers of makers paying 20 quid a user a month, when they might or might not use it, probably not worthwhile, isn't it? It's tricky.
Yeah, I think there are, just to continue on the discussion, Stuart, I think there are a lot of new features that are coming in the managed environments. So you can see, on the tenant settings, there are these green icons, the dial icons. So there are.
I'm going to say, personally, as someone who finds the concept of sentence development scary, the fact you can just stop them from creating 800 semi apps and 5,000 half-finished flows in the default environment and just leave them hanging about there. The fact we can push them onto something else is just worth the price of admission by itself.
Why telling that to a customer though?
Well, even my development environment has like 400 half-built bits in it.
It's just scary, isn't it?
Just lying about.
Yeah.
Right. So to recap on how did we enable, basically, so you need developer environment assignment and then the environment routing. And then you got a bit more control as of today so you can limit and test at the security group level. And then there are few rules that get applied for each of those groups. But then this is the question, right? Should you enable it or not enable it? I think without using the environment routing, you can still enable. There are options, as in there are use cases, but it doesn't add much value if you're just beginning of the journey, right? Where you're very early stages within the Power Platform, and your users are building solutions. You haven't grown. You won't see a lot of value with managed environments, and you might be using only just like SharePoint or Teams connector, not Dataverse, like Stuart mentioned, where as an example, everyone is using Dataverse. But if you're just using the standard connectors, not building even enterprise level applications, then the managed environments is not going to add much of value. And again, there could be seeded licenses with M365 people might be building flows here and there, but you haven't seen the growth, or it's not the overall strategy of the IT teams, then it doesn't grow, and you may not need even managed environments. But the interesting thing
question,
is,
sorry, just on that. Sorry to cut across again. When you switch on managed environments, is that switching on managed environments for the whole tenant? Or could you specify, for example, environments 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have Dataverse in them, therefore they're managed environments, and not specify that environment 6 that's just used for SharePoint, Teams, etc. is a managed environment? Is that possible?
Yeah. So this one, what we saw just now, environment routing is only for the developer environments, and they become managed environments. And most of the times, like James mentioned, with the starter kit or manual approach, when you go ahead and create, this won't be managed by default. So you go and enable a particular environment to manage. For example, I got a development environment, which is of type sandbox. And then either you enable or don't enable. So there might be requirements, like you said, Stuart, where I wanted to use only standard connectors, then I won't enable those environments as managed. So I'll keep them as normal environments.
That's good to know. I think that helps with the sell as well, because if you've got an environment that's only got Dataverse apps in it, everyone's paying for licensing anyway. So this is an additional feature, whereas for a SharePoint only environment, you're paying nothing right now. So thanks for confirming that.
No worries. And also, I think once you enable it, and also there would be PowerShell, but I'm hoping they will make it available even at the UI. So you can basically disable it, but currently it's only possible via PowerShell. So you need to run a PowerShell if you want to disable that environment to back to the default state. Right. When it adds more value, I think, let's say you got hundreds and thousands of environments and you're only the admin, you don't have any further support, but then a lot of active base users, and then you want to have a dedicated onboarding process. For example, you're building solutions for finance department, so you want them to follow specific guidelines. Maybe there is a legal department who is building quite a few solutions, and then that's where I see a lot of value with the managed environments. And then this is the most important one. You got a strategy in place already, and you have goals to achieve. And without this, it doesn't add much value. And also, I just try to put together this one with the effort and the value. So I still see you don't need a lot of effort with the managed environments. All you got to do is take a few settings and you're up and running. But then you don't. You get a lot of value. I think this will go up and up, and starter kit will go a little bit down. But I still see starter kit add a lot more value now, though it requires a lot of effort because the number of objects and components and the complexity it got, and upgrade is quite challenging, as in like you always need to manage, maintain. But whereas the other tools, bit more effort, bit more lower value. Yeah, that's where I'm at least seeing how Microsoft is going towards. But yeah, just to reiterate, managed environments doesn't add a lot of value if you got a few people. If you got large active user base, that's where you have more value. So a few recommendations based on my experience. Don't start with some of the environments that are critical and high impact. So I would say start slowly, test those features, get feedback from your makers, and then enable it at the larger scale. What I'm envisioning is, for example, extending the starter kit, like James mentioned. You can provision the environment, then you can enable it as managed environment, and then potentially having pipelines added. So I haven't covered that as part of this, but yeah, just looking at the time. So that's how I see it. So don't go full on with the managed environments. Licensing is a restriction though, but still start small. That's what my recommendation is. And then few resources. So there is a podcast called Low Code Approach. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. It's done by Microsoft team and Simon Woven. I think most of you know. He wrote a blog post on the scalable governance. It's a fantastic resource. And then there is a Microsoft white paper. I saw yesterday Craig White and Michael wrote a post. So yeah, I missed adding it. Probably I'll send the link in the chat. So have a look at those resources. I think they're amazing. Yeah. Any final questions? I think just looking at the clock, I got a minute.
I've got a quick one.
Yep.
So one of the things, so I do quite a lot of starter kit stuff because we're always saying to customers, put your guardrails in place before you have the problems. So would you see? I know you're saying it, you get best value when you're like tens or thousands, hundreds or thousands of environments. But would you see it as a good, a good starter, saying, start managing environments when you've only got 5 or 6, so that when you start growing, you're controlling that growth rather than wait till you've got 50 and then start trying to put it in place?
Yeah, I agree. But a lot of people will be still questioning about the value versus the amount they're going to pay, right? Let's say you got a application where it's generating a lot of value. Yes, definitely. But the managed environments are going to make it easy if you've got large number of environments that you wanted to control. But yeah, I agree with you, James. Start slowly. If you got an opportunity, if you got licenses, yeah, why not?
Okay.
That was great. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much, Devendra. That was a really good session. Some great discussion generated from that as well. So always good to see everyone get involved and asking questions.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate that.
You're welcome. And yeah, I guess so we'll hand over to our final speaker tonight, Charles. And yeah, Charles, you take the floor and well, so your session.
Thank you. Yeah, great session so far. Really good. Learning something every day. All right, so my session is about PowerFX. There is a little bit of overlap with what Nathan talked about, but I'll be talking about it in a different context, so it won't be repeated. We're going to go through things to do with performance, pitfalls and pro tips, and just general bits and pieces to do with PowerFX. And there should be something for everyone here. So some beginner stuff and some advanced stuff. So initially, I'll just go through an intro as to who I am, and then we'll talk about what PowerFX is. So somewhat similar to Nathan's, but this will be a bit different. And then we'll talk about where PowerFX is used. So I'll go into a bit more detail than Nathan did on that one. And then we'll go into a demo where we'll open up a Canvas app and start hacking away at it and exploring what PowerFX can do. So who the FX is this guy? My name's Charles Sexton. I'm a Power Platform developer / consultant. I used to be a web developer, but also did other bits and pieces in my former life. I've enjoyed collecting certifications, as Keith Atherton does as well. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free. And the QR code on the right is to go to my website, charlessexton.com. And on there, I blog about PowerFX and Power Apps in general. And yeah, try to write about things that people haven't talked about before. So try to give new information. So what is PowerFX? Nathan has covered it, but I'll go through in a little bit more detail here. So there are a few different things to bear in mind with PowerFX. So it's concise and simple, which we already know. It's good for people who don't know programming as well as people who are seasoned professionals. It's a general purpose language. So that means that you can use it in a variety of applications. So we all know that you can use this in Canvas apps, but it's spreading throughout the Microsoft ecosystem. And it's even been used outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. As Nathan talked about, it's strongly typed. So everything has a type, whether it's a number, a string, that kind of thing. It's declarative. So going back to that McDonald's concept. And it's functional. So everything's composed with functions. And as Nathan also said, it's Excel-like. So this particular piece of code will tell you the number of characters in SPUG, and it will work in Excel, and it will work in Canvas apps and wherever else you're going to use PowerFX. So because of that, and because there are 1.1 billion to 1.5 billion users of Excel, that's that many people who can quite quickly and easily move into the PowerFX world, which also equates to 54% of businesses. So that's pretty cool. It means that we have potential makers everywhere, really, across the world. But there is something to bear in mind, and that it's not the same. So again, going back to what Nathan was showing, depending on where you're using PowerFX, there might be slight differences. And there'll be differences between Excel and Canvas apps. So with PowerFX, there are some things to bear in mind that are very cool features, actually, and that it's always live. So it means that the changes that you make are instant, which means that you get IntelliSense. So you get these auto completions that it can tell you from what you're typing. So if you're accessing a data source, it can tell you what's available within that data source. But then it also means that we get things like autocomplete and suggestions. And it also means that we get type checking. So if we're typing out something and we're using a string in the wrong sense, we're trying to use it like a number, we immediately get the feedback that we're doing something wrong. We don't need to run the code. It's always running. So I put instant in quotation marks because it still has to actually digest that code. So it's not going to be instant, but it's near instant. So last night for us in the UK, there was a blog post to do with Copilot in PowerFX. And so I quickly added this, and these are the two things that it's going to give us in the formula bar for Canvas apps. It's going to give us the ability to explain a formula. So if you have a formula, you can highlight it and you can then ask Copilot to explain it, and it will try to tell you in natural language what that formula is supposed to be doing. And then there's another one, which is where you can actually generate the formula yourself using natural language. And that's in preview at the moment. The explainer formula apparently is not in preview, it's going straight into production. So the other thing to bear in mind with PowerFX is that it's open source, which I think is very cool because it offers quite a few benefits. So it means that if we want to, we can delve into the code and we can learn it, or we can try to understand it, which could potentially help us with making Canvas apps or making other things where we're using PowerFX. If we have the ability, we can also contribute to the code base. So we can add functions to PowerFX that get incorporated into that code base that then everyone can use. And if we do something like that, of course, it's going to enhance our career prospects. We can also use PowerFX. So we can take PowerFX and we can incorporate it into an app that's completely separate from everything else. So this has already been done before. There's been someone who has taken PowerFX and they've incorporated it into their own app for their customers to be able to type PowerFX into the app in order to perform queries and stuff like that. So it's really cool. And of course, it being open source means that it's more likely to become more popular. People are going to be less hesitant to use it as opposed to a closed source software, because it means that whatever happens is always going to be available and they can always use it, and they can fork the source and change it themselves if they want to, or they can just use it as is. So I think those things are really cool. And now on to where it's used. So this is a fast moving thing. So it's obviously used in Canvas apps, we all know that. And probably all of us know that it's also used in model-driven apps. And it's also used in Dataverse, which again, probably most people know. So there are formula columns where you can use PowerFX. But then there are more places where it's appearing nowadays. So you can use it in Copilot Studio. So this is where you're setting a variable. You can use PowerFX. It's in preview for the Power Platform command line interface, which is the CLI. So within this, you can type the code into your CLI, into your terminal, or you could actually put it into a file and then you can run that file. So you could perform batch operations, you could automate things by having that PowerFX code in a file and it gets run automatically. So there's quite a lot of power there, but it's probably not really been tested at the moment because it's in preview, but I can see some really cool things coming out of that. It's obviously available in low-code plugins, as we all know now, and that's really good. And it's going to come to Power Pages in the future. So the upper screenshot is from a YouTube video from the Release Wave 1 YouTube video from Microsoft. And Josh actually spotted that one and pointed it out to me. And then I went digging around and I couldn't find anything about it until I looked at Microsoft Build and they have a session on it. So yeah, if you want to, you can attend that session next month or it's this month if you're in New Zealand or Australia. And I think it's on the 21st of May or something like that. And they're doing a session on PowerFX inside of Power Pages. So that's quite interesting. So we've got so many languages now that we can use in Power Pages. It's pretty crazy. And the final one is Power Automate Desktop Flows. So you can use it within there for setting variables. I'm not sure if you can do more than setting variables yet. It's in preview. So again, something we'll be waiting for to use in production. So yeah, that's PowerFX. That's the kind of basis of everything. So now I need everyone to fasten your seatbelts because we're going flying with our demo. And we're now going to look at our demo app, which is for a travel company. And it's more than just a button, I promise. Let me just move everyone over so I can hopefully still see you. All right, so yeah, going on to this app. So the premise of it, I wanted to have some kind of premise for this because I didn't want to just show you random things. So I'm saying that this is a travel company. We can open up the screen here and this is to be used by their employees for them to calculate holidays for their clients and then add them to a travel package and be able to tell them how much they're getting. It's that kind of rough idea. But I've chucked stuff in here so that I can give you demos on different features, more so than showing you an app that actually makes a lot of sense. So the first thing I wanted to show is that we've got this company called Flow Air, and they're a bit like Microsoft. They decided that Flow's not really the right name for their service. They actually want to rebrand. So one thing that I've incorporated into this app is that we can just use the modern themes. And they want to be called Copilot Air because they want to be very current. And so I just wanted to show you that it's very easy to swap between the modern themes and also to show you that you can actually go in there and get that theme name and you can alter depending on that. So it's a slightly weird use case, but yeah, you can change the theme just as simply as that. So of course, as an example, we can change to anything and it's no problem. And all we're doing in order to use the theme is we're accessing app.theme. And then within there, you have a .colors and you can bring those all through into your app. And then whatever theme you set, they'll come through. So now let's actually look at the functionality of this app that we've got. So I'll just bring it through here. I'll put it into tablet mode because I think it's a bit easier to digest. So we've got this option here to filter by continent. So if I choose, I don't know, North America, then we've got Barbados there. So this is good, and the staff are enjoying this, but they don't like the fact that it's not in alphabetical order. So that's something that we should deal with straight away. So when we come into here, we can see that it's a choices column, and we've got all of our choices coming through here. And yeah, we're using the values of them to then display it. One of the things that I found very confusing about choices is that there's this almost mix up between value and label, because essentially we're showing the value, but it's called the label behind the scenes. So I find that quite confusing. And the first time I tried to sort a choices column, I found that extremely confusing because I thought, well, you just wrap it in a sort, right? So you just put sort and then you sort it by whatever you want to sort it by. I don't know, the value, yeah? And then that should be it, right? It should be sorted now. But no, it's not. And that's because it's trying to sort it by this value here. And that's not what we want. We want to sort it by the label. So what we actually have to do is we have to get the value of that, which is, funnily enough, the label. And then we need to typecast it to text because we want to make sure that it's treated as text. And then now that we've done that, it will actually sort it. So that's a weird little hack and strange understanding, but that's basically how it works. We've also got this customer choices here, but this is actually pulling through from a SharePoint list. So if we want to sort by customers, we can actually do what we said before, where we just sort by whichever column it is that we want. So for this one, it's just sorting by the title. Now all of our customers are sorted. So that's really good. If we highlight it and we have a look, to me, I see that there's a problem there because all we want is the customer names. But look at all of that information that we're bringing through for no reason at all. So what we can do here is we can do a show columns to tell it that I want to show only these particular columns. And really, it's only the one column, isn't it? It's the title. So now once we put that in there, you can see we're just bringing through the title. Therefore, we're optimizing the performance. There's only one thing we want from that. So yeah, that's much better. So now let's also think.
Charles, just,
sorry,
just a quick thing that I've been digging for this in the background. The part that you mentioned around the dot value on choices.
Yeah.
So you do dot value and then sort by text value.
Yeah.
There's a new feature came out just a couple of days ago to flatten JSON tables.
Cool. Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to experiment with it yet, but I think
might be able to improve
that will simplify this down.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be great.
But it's just a JSON object that comes back for the choices, isn't it?
To be honest, I'm not actually sure. Yeah, I don't know. But we can, yeah, we can investigate that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I was talking about is with the combo box. So we're using the modern combo box here, and that actually is using delegation. So it's delegating to the data source. But when we're using the classic combo box, and of course, you're bearing in mind here that we are using a SharePoint list in the background, and we've got our customers. So I'll just bring that through to the classic combo box. And it's absolutely fine, even though it wasn't before. There was something I wanted to demonstrate, which is this warning triangle. So it's saying that the search won't work correctly. So the classic combo box can't delegate, whereas the modern combo box can. And if you do get this warning and you know that it doesn't matter because, for example, we've got a 500 item, 500 record limit, and we're only going to bring through 200 customers, you can just bring through, well, not last, you can just bring through the first X number of records. And what that will do is it will just get rid of that delegation warning. So like that, just because you don't want to see it as a developer because you know that there's not actually a problem there. You don't want it to give you that kind of warning. So that's just a small thing.
I'll have a customer say, what's that yellow triangle mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so now let's move on to the travel package. So if I add just something to the travel package, what's happening behind the scenes is that we're suddenly seeing a gallery and the initial message is disappearing. So this no destinations added. So if we look at the visibility of this, for this, we're basically saying if that gallery is not visible, then show this. And if we look at the gallery itself, what we're saying here is if you've got some records in you, then be true, otherwise be false. And I've seen this a lot where developers have put if something true, otherwise false. But because we're in the visibility and it's a Boolean anyway, we don't really need all of this code. All we need to do is just say, if there are items, yeah, it's true. That's fine. So it's simplified. No need to put all of that into there. With the remove button for this, it's probably a bit small for you, but here, this remove button. So just a small tip here that probably most of you know, but just in case you don't, if you've got multiple pieces of code that can run at the same time and are not reliant on each other, then you can put them into a concurrent function. And what that means is that you then don't want to have the semicolon at the end. You just separate them by commas because they're now essentially parameters inside that function. So the way that PowerFX works is that it will run through line by line, and it will only continue to the next line once it's finished with the statement before. Using concurrent, it means that we can run them all concurrently in parallel. So that can give you performance improvements it wouldn't do on this particular piece of code, but where you're running data processing, it can absolutely increase the performance a lot. So moving on now, let's clear this filter so that we've got more records in here. So in our gallery here, where we've got all of our destinations, let's have a look at the items for that. So in the items for this, I'm saying if our continent is not selected, if it's blank, give us the destination's data source. Otherwise, if there's a value in there, we want to filter by the continent. So we want to get the value from within our continent, make sure it matches the continent column in our table, and then we'll show all of those records. And that's fine. It's going to operate with no problem. But what happens if we start adding more filters? So we want to filter by different things in this left-hand menu. How are we going to handle that? Are we going to put more if statements in there? Are we going to do, I don't know, like, are we going to start nesting things in some strange manner? Maybe, but we don't really need to do that. And I'll just copy this code to make it simpler. But basically, we can have just the one filter statement, and then we can kind of trick this into doing the filter for us. So we're saying that if it's blank, then it's true, give us everything. So that's the normal scenario. But if it's not blank, then we need to check that the continent matches. So through this method, it means we then just need to add extra lines of code for all of the other filter statements that we add. So it becomes a lot more modular, and we don't need to repeat our data source, which is important because we might need to change it at some point. So now let's look inside of the gallery. So each of these items, we've got some crazy code in here. So here I'm using the HTML control. And what I'm doing is I have a div which has some rounded corners and stuff like that. And then inside of that, I have an image. So this is all HTML. And the reason why I'm using an image for this is because these images are WebP images. So they're optimized so that they're quite small file sizes. So we can't use them in an image control. And it's quite easy just to put them in like this in an HTML image tag. But this code is extremely messy. It's not nice at all. And what you can see is that in order to use PowerFX inside of here, we're splitting everything up by closing off the quotes and putting in an ampersand. And that makes it look pretty crazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just replace that all with string interpolation. And I'm also going to put some spaces in there, some carriage returns. So we can then see all of our styles on our div. We can see that we've got our image there, all of the styles on the image, and then we can finally actually see, okay, this is where the source of the image comes from. So using string interpolation, we can massively improve the readability, but also by adding carriage returns, we can make it much easier to read. So it's much easier to digest this now. But we do have an issue with this. So what's happening here is that as we're looping through all of these items, we're performing a lookup for each of the images. But what this means is that for every single item, we're performing a network request. So we're going off to the data source every single time. If we've got 100 here, then we're performing 100 extra requests just to get an image. That's really not ideal. So what we really should be doing here is we should be performing this lookup inside of our items for the gallery. And how would we do that? So if I just grab the code for it, we can go to the items for our gallery. And then we can perform an add columns. So we can add columns to this. That's up to you as to where you want to put it. I can't remember where I put it originally. Let's just put it on the outside for now. So let's say that we want to add another column and we want to just call it photo because that makes sense. Then we put in the code for that particular column, and then we close this off. Now what you can see is that this is still referring to this item. So it's still referring to the old information. Now what we want to do is we want to refer to whatever's inside of this filter statement. If we put something like this record, which seems like it's logical, right? Not really, because if we're doing this record, we're referring to the record in our lookup, not the record from our filter. So what we need to do is we need to access this somehow, and we can use as. So we can say, for example, as destination, and then it means that we get access to this now, this filter statement. So then we can put destination in here. So we're telling it for this destination, we want to do this. And I've got an extra bracket in there, so let's get rid of that. And then now what it's doing is still the same thing, of course, because I haven't changed this. But if I change this now to just refer to that particular record, then it will be happy. So this item, and then the column that we created, which is photo, and an extra bracket, which I love doing. So now what we're doing is we're doing the one network request to SharePoint in order to get all of those images, because we're requesting them all in one go. So it's much more performant. So let's have a look at the calculations that we're doing in here. So I'm performing a calculation for the number of days times by the cost, right? When we do an add to package, we're also doing that calculation, aren't we? Because we need this information that's dynamically generated here. So we've got the same calculation happening twice. And there's a really cool feature that's in preview at the moment, which is called user-defined functions inside of formulas. And so that's what I've utilized for this. And I'll just go through how it actually works. So you name your function, you open it with the brackets, and then you specify your parameters, and they're separated by commas. Now, it might look a bit weird compared to normal parafex because we've got this colon number, and that's because we're typecasting. We're essentially telling parafex days is a number, cost is a number. But then we're also typecasting the entire return for the function by saying that that will be a number as well. Then after that, we've got an equals, and then we've got our formula that we're going to use. So our formula is really simple. It's days multiplied by cost. But the massive benefit for something like this, once it's out of preview, of course, is that we can incorporate a discount into the formula. We can incorporate tax into the formula, and we can reuse it everywhere. And whenever there's a change, all we have to do is change this. And if we want to use that formula, you can see in here, it's just referencing the formula here with the value and the cost, and then it will give us a result. And I'm just wrapping that in a text so that I can format it as a financial figure. But it's very simple and very, very, very powerful. So let's look at some other things. We've got an update package here, and we've got an add to package here, right? So how are we doing that? We're checking if the package exists, and if it exists, then it's an add to package. If it's blank, update package. If it's blank, then it's an add to package. And there was something else I was going to show you within this. I can't remember what it was. It was in here. So in the on select for it. So yeah, there's a lot to digest here. And the reason why there's a lot to digest is because it can be improved. So the button that we're using for this btn save package _2. So we're actually inside this button. So I think it's craziness to write the name of it when we can just write self. We can find the keys because we're referring to the self. And this is much, much better for a developer because they immediately know, okay, you're referring to the control that we're inside at the moment. Now, what you'll notice here is that we've got some repeated code. So we've got this record that we're updating or creating, and it's identical in both of these places. So what we're doing is we're repeating ourselves, and we don't need to. So instead of doing this, we can go back to using the with function that Nathan mentioned. And I'm just going to copy and paste this because I don't want you to have to wait too long for it. But essentially, we put all of this information into a temporary variable in with that will only be used within the context of the with function. and then we can reuse it for our record here in package item and our record here in package item. So we're updating it here because we're looking at the record and then storing it, and then we are adding it to our collection here. So it's much cleaner, much easier to read, much easier to understand, and it's nice and performant. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is explicit column selection. This is a really interesting one. So this is basically where Power Apps Studio will try to figure out what information you want when you're requesting information from a data source. And I've got a way to show it to you basically, which is we've got this more info button, and on this button in the on select, we're sending ourselves to receive record, to this receive record screen. Don't worry too much about the naming of it. And what we're doing is we're sending through the ID, so the GUID of that particular record, and then we're also sending through the entire record because we want to look at what's coming through. So now let's go through to this particular screen. Now I've put in some boilerplate here. So my creator is, so we want to know the creator of that particular record. So if I just paste that in there, we're not getting an error message. So why not? So we're looking at the record and we've got all of the information in there. That's fine. We're getting the created by, and then we're getting the full name of them. Let's have a look at doing that for the record, right? Sorry, for the GUID. So with the GUID, we're looking up the record and then we're getting the same information, but it's coming through. And the reason for this is explicit column selection. So Power Apps is trying to figure out what information you want, and when it's performing that network request, it's requesting only what it thinks you want. Now that we're referencing this information, if we go back to that gallery and we click on the button again, we have the information. And that's because it's now understands this is the information you want, so I'll let you have it this time. So it's something that's really important to bear in mind. So what we're doing here when we're clicking on, well, when we're bringing through the information for the gallery, is it will be bringing through that created by user, that the full name of the created by user. So there's a performance hit there. If we're passing through that entire record to other screens in multiple different places, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be requesting all of the columns that those other screens want on this screen. And that's something that's important to bear in mind. Whereas if we pass through just the ID, we don't get that performance hit on here. There's a separation of concerns. And we can then request the actual information that we want on the screen. So you could put this in the on visible for the screen. We're only requesting one record, so it's barely a performance hit for that. Whereas on the previous screen, if we're referring to all of those columns, we're referring to all of them for every single item that's in that gallery. So there's a performance hit. There's also something else to bear in mind with that, which is that if we're implementing deep linking in the app, well, we're probably going to be passing through a GUID, right? So if we're passing through a GUID to this screen, then having it in the on visible seems to make sense because we can just grab that GUID and then we can use it. But if we're passing through a whole record, that's not really any help to us if we're passing through a parameter through deep linking. So deep linking, for those who don't know, would be, for example, if we have an email notification that gets sent out and there's a link to a specific record in the app inside of that email. So you click on that link and it should bring you through to the record inside of the app. So you would be passing through some kind of ID in that context usually. So yeah, some interesting things to bear in mind with that. And as you saw, there is the other performance side of things with SharePoint. So SharePoint doesn't care. SharePoint's just going to give us everything. There's no cleverness there with that one. But with Dataverse, there is the cleverness behind it. And we have to bear that in mind because we might be trying to access information further down the line in different screens, but it's not appearing. And that's probably because of explicit column selection. And it won't necessarily give you an error message. In fact, it almost certainly won't give you an error message. So there are some other cool things that I wanted to show you. Things that I use quite often are keyboard shortcuts. So one that's a very common one for me, we can probably demo it on the image here, is that let's say that we wanted to change this con destination item _1, and we want to change it everywhere within our formula here. Well, we could change them one by one, but if you press Control and D, you can highlight the next ones. So then we can change everything all in one go. So you can improve your productivity there if you've got things that you want to change all in one go. Some other cool tips are things like, say you wanted to move a line up or down. You might cut and paste it, which is fine, but you can also hold down Alt and press up arrow or down arrow, and that will move it up or down. Or you might want to duplicate the code for some reason. So then you hold down Alt and you hold down Shift, and then you press up or down again. And so you can start doing some really interesting things with your code once you've got these shortcuts down. And then as an example, so if I highlight that and I press Control and D, I can then delete them all in one go like that. So yeah, keyboard shortcuts are very cool as well. And that's essentially everything I wanted to show, I think. Happy to take any questions.
Charles, I know you know the answer to this one because you've told me it before.
Okay.
On my tree view on the left-hand side, can I bring controls up and down with a keyboard shortcut?
Yeah, good point. You can do that. So when you've highlighted one, you hold down Control, and then it's left square bracket to bring it up, or right square bracket to bring it down. And yeah, I'm using that all the time, over and over. Unfortunately, you can't do it with screens, which is a bit annoying, because sometimes you might have a screen right at the bottom, you want to bring it much higher up, but yeah, can't do that.
I showed that to one of my colleagues earlier on today, and his mind exploded. It was like, this is the best thing I've seen since Control W on Teams for hiding the share bar.
Yeah,
It was
it's
so
such a
exciting.
time saver. Yeah, it's so good. I would love for Microsoft to have a page of all of the keyboard shortcuts, but they don't. They have some of them on it, but only some of them. But on my website, I'm curating a list of keyboard shortcuts. So you can go there and I've got a ton of them, probably not all of them, but maybe the majority of them. So some really interesting things on there. And the one I didn't show.
I was going to jokingly say you should do it if Microsoft won't, but yeah, you beat me to it.
There we go. Yeah. So the Control and D, there's also Control, Shift, and L to highlight all of the occurrences, which is the one I always forget. Any other questions or comments? Like anything people want to add? Because I haven't covered everything. There's loads of stuff to this. I've missed out loads of things, and I'm happy for people to add cool tips that they have.
Can you show us a little bit on app formulas? So I know you touched on the user-defined functions. You can do other stuff with app formulas as well. I know you know some cool stuff on that. So
yeah, so typically for app formulas, well, it's basically for reusable content, reusable information, and it will only run when it's called, which is what's amazing about it performance-wise. And it goes in the same place as where you would put your user-defined functions. And it's a very similar thing, except at the moment, there's no typecasting for it. You just put whatever your formula name is and then it equals whatever, and then close it off. You have to make sure to put you have to put the semicolons at the end, otherwise it won't be happy. And typically I'm using this for where I have a query to a data source that I know I'm going to need to reuse, and it's always the same, or I use it for theming as well. So where we can't use the modern controls, or maybe the modern controls don't have enough flexibility for us and we're still using classic controls, we probably want to set up a theme of some kind. And that's where I'd be putting it into here. And then you can have a reusable theme within that you can use throughout your app.
Another nice thing I like with them is environment variables. So
yeah,
for
I've used it with that as well.
I've got 10 environment variables that are text things. Call them all in your formulas. And as you say, they only get called when they're needed.
Yeah.
So as opposed to calling it on a screen and forgetting where they are, you basically use as a container to hold all your calls to environment variables.
Yeah.
And they can also refer to each other as well. So you could have one that's called, I don't know, logged in user. That's just your user open brackets. And then have logged in user email is logged in user dot email. and build up really complex ones. There was an example kicking about a chessboard on one of the Microsoft blogs a while ago, and chess is the most boring sport in the world, but the blog was really quite exciting when they explained how you would build up a chessboard using strings of these, basically. It was really quite cool.
Yeah, I've used chaining with it before as well, actually.
Chess isn't a great sport.
I used it with security roles, like, similar to what you're saying. So grabbing security roles, grabbing security groups, and doing that kind of thing. So you can check the user's security access on the fly, and it will only perform that request when it's actually needed. And yeah, that's really, really
good
useful.
for things like admin screens, isn't it? Or like hiding buttons that you would only show to admin users.
Yeah.
Check the role when you need to, don't check it when you don't.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
really great for trimming down app on start. I'm quite happy to say we've just released our first app with no one start. I never thought I would get to that day, but yeah, we just released our first one with no one start in favour of app formulas. It's not fancy, but it's a step.
It's a great sign, yeah, definitely.
And we use string interpolation in it as well, which I was really happy to see you talking about them.
Yeah, and I think something that's underrated is using the right spacing with things. Like if we go and, I don't know whether it'll work with this, but if I click on format text here, it's going to make it look uglier than it was before because it's going to add spacing where we don't want spacing. So I'd prefer to put the onus on the developer to decide where spacing should occur and where it shouldn't occur. It's a similar thing with the with function here as well. So we've got our total cost, which is the user-defined function, and it's nice to have it all on one line, same with the update and the collect. But if we use format text, then in my opinion, that looks a lot uglier and a lot more difficult to understand. So yeah, I would be cautious about using format text, but definitely using spacing in order to understand formulas better.
While we've got time and while you're on the subject of that, would you mind bringing up a relatively simple formula and asking Copilot to explain this formula?
Yeah, do we have this already in this? I'm not sure. We do. So this expression navigates to the screen named receive record with no visual transition, passing the context record containing the ID value from the current item's destination field and the entire current item record. Perfect. Yeah. Should we try and do something a bit crazy with it?
Yeah, let's find a bonkers formula, something like this one. Yeah, that's what this one does.
This expression concatenates various values and strings together to create a string that will be assigned to the HTML text property. So yeah, it does do that, but it's not really telling us what it does. But it's not a bad start.
Yeah. It's not wrong, it's just not very accurate.
No. Yeah.
It does stuff, is basically what that said.
Yeah.
It's a nice little feature. It's mad to see something like that go straight into GA as well.
And it's really quick as well. So it removes the current item from the collection, displays a success notification with the name. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, it's looking very powerful, and it means that people who have been only working with Excel or maybe not even working with code at all, when they get the option to generate the code with natural language, they're potentially going to create some amazing things from it.
Or potentially create some rubbish like the natural language flows.
Yeah, or potentially destroy the environment.
To explain it, it makes sense. Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got a question in the chat from Christoph around any tips on component property types. So specifically around the data function email action.
Yeah, we're talking about components here, as in these components?
Yes, by the looks of it. There's a message in the chat about 2 or 3 minutes ago, if that helps you, mate.
Yeah, I don't really have any tips about them. I do use them, and I think that they're really good for reusing components. Of course, we can't use them in a gallery, which is a bit frustrating sometimes. I would be cautious about using any inputs, so form inputs inside of components, because they can have some weird functionality. Particularly things like combo boxes can be difficult because the data is flexible. With, say, a standard text input, you shouldn't have any problems. But yeah, exercise some caution with form inputs and with really complex things. But yeah, components are brilliant for like reusable elements like headers and menus and that kind of thing. And yeah, I use them, but I don't really have any tips about inputs and outputs. We of course have new properties that are coming. I think it's still an experimental, isn't it? Enhanced component properties. So I have been using these and they seem great. It takes a bit of time to get your head around exactly how they work. So I don't really have any tips for them yet, but they will be very useful. There is, of course, the other bit about app scope, which is important. So if you want to access things from within your app here, you have to turn on app scope. And you might be concerned about performance implications with that. But I typically turn on app scope in order to get the theme through to the component and that kind of stuff. I haven't noticed any performance impact with that. But yeah, something to bear in mind. But yeah, I think Christoph probably has a lot of tips that he can give to us on that one.
Any other questions from anyone? No, I think we're
just before we
good to
go on to closing, Josh, I just want
in that case.
Yeah, I just want to take a wee second to say thanks to all three speakers. Really great sessions, learned something in every single one of them. So thank you to all three of you. And yeah, back to you, Josh.
Yeah, just echo those comments. Fantastic sessions from everyone. I think we've all learned something new tonight. Also, thanks everyone for attending as well. Always good to see everyone here, new and old. Brilliant. So just whilst we wrap up, just a couple of things to note is our next event is an in-person event. Charlie Stewart, you'll probably want to keep me right here in terms of dates, but I think we're on for the 21st of May. And yeah, in person, we're in Glasgow. Are we announcing the venue tonight? Are we?
Yeah, go on.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it'll be published
Yeah,
tomorrow,
awesome.
so you can give them a little preview tonight.
Yeah, so 21st of May, we will be hosting our in-person event at SWD3, the Poetry Club. So hopefully, hope to see you all there because it's going to be a really cool session, really cool evening. So yeah, absolutely looking forward to that. And yeah, anything else to add? Charlie Stewart, probably just a thank you to sponsors and stuff, the usual kind of stuff there. But otherwise, I think we're all good.
Yeah, no sponsors for this one, but yeah, all good.
Good stuff. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for attending and enjoy the rest of your evenings. And yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn if you feel like speaking or anything like that in the future, or even just a chat. You know, we're approachable and always looking for chats. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Cheers all.
Thanks, everyone. Great work. Cheers.
Thanks. Great presentation, guys. Bye.
Thank you.